Usa mascarilla. Lava tus manos. Mantén distancia. Ventila. Sigamos cuidándonos contra el COVID-19. Desde el Palacio de la Moneda, el Gobierno de Chile informa.
Good afternoon. Today, we would like to share with you a balance of the vaccination process and an analysis of the effectiveness of the booster vaccine. As of yesterday, together, we have been able to vaccinate with 2 doses 14.2 million persons. That is, 3 out of 4 of our fellow countrymen. I am grateful because it's been a titanic effort, so I thank everyone who has contributed to thus protect the life and the health of millions of Chileans. Chile was a pioneer when starting in August a massive process of vaccination with the booster shot, which has allowed us to protect through this booster shot more than 3.6 million persons. We were also pioneers when, in September, we started the vaccination of children older than 6 years of age. In educational facilities, and in a few weeks we've been able to vaccinate with the first dose 4 out of 10 children between 6 and 11 years. These achievements, and some are upset when we recall this, but I believe it is good to share it because it is the merit of each one of us. Put Chile jointly with Israel and Uruguay amongst the 3 countries of the world with the greatest progress in these matters. Today, we received 250,000 of AstraZeneca vaccines, so we're coming close to the 40 million doses of vaccines already received. And this is important because it allows us to ensure a vaccination program and also to guarantee the provision of vaccines for the next year, 2022. The vaccines that we have applied in Chile are safe and effective, and they've been able to significantly reduce contagion, hospitalization, and most importantly, they have contributed to saving many, many lives. Nevertheless, scientific evidence, both of a Chilean origin as well as international origin, show that with time, the protection of the vaccines starts to wane. This verification, jointly with the threat entailed by the Delta variant, led us early August to very early on start a massive process of booster shots. We started with those older than 55, and today we are progressively applying this booster vaccine to all the population older than 18. The start of the vaccination of school children within their schools and the rapid advance of this booster vaccination allowed us past week to vaccinate more than 1 million persons. The weekly figure of vaccination that has been the highest within the semester, amongst the highest since the start of the pandemic, which shows commitment and the work of many, many persons. Today, we would like to present to you a trial conducted by the Ministry of Health and led by Dr. Rafael Arauz. This trial analyzed the population of 11 million persons and measured the efficacy of the booster dose to strengthen the protection against COVID-19. And, thank God, it is bearing promising results. What does the trial show? It shows that the booster shot has a very high efficacy to prevent both contagion as well as hospitalizations, which no doubt is a very good news, because it means that the Chilean families will be better protected. In terms of avoiding hospitalizations, the booster with Sinovac, to those who already have 2 Sinovac vaccines, attains an effectiveness of 88%. The booster shot with Pfizer, an effectiveness of 87%, and the booster with AstraZeneca, an effectiveness of 96%. This is very good news because it means that Chileans are better protected to the pandemic. And it also shows that Chile made a good decision when, early August, we were one of the first countries in the world in starting this massive booster vaccination. But let's make no mistake here, the pandemic is still alive amongst us, and for no reason should be overly confident. I make a special appeal to those who can get the booster vaccination to do so, to complete the booster regimen, because this booster shot is as important as having received the first 2 doses. Also, an appeal to those who are lagging behind, get your shots, and an appeal to everyone. We have to rigorously maintain our personal care and strictly comply with the health protocols, because vaccination is not just an act of personal responsibility, it is also an act of solidarity to our loved ones. Let us remember that if we're together, we take better care of all of us, and we will only be truly protected when all of us, all are protected. These good results have allowed us to eliminate many restrictions, to expand freedom through the new step-by-step plan. But these greater freedoms require greater responsibility on the part of all Chileans. I am certain, because I know Chileans, that we will know how to exercise these greater freedoms with more responsibility. And I'm also certain that together and collaborating, we will surpass this devastating pandemic, and we can resume our paths to achieve our projects and fulfill our dreams, and some to search what we all search for, happiness with our families and our loved ones. Thank you very much, and I now leave you with the Minister of Health, Dr. Enrique Paris.
Thank you very much, President. The pandemic has challenged us and has put our country at a test, as well as our sanitary system. I think that Chile and its government have responded adequately with unity, strength, and generosity. Nonetheless, our hard task against COVID-19 must continue as the pandemic due to COVID-19 has advanced. Science has also advanced, and with this we were able to observe the great advances that have been deployed around the development of vaccines against this virus in different parts of the world. In Chile, thanks to the early negotiations by the government of Chile, led by our president, Sebastián Piñera, we could have access to a pool of different vaccines, and science also advanced, because after the start of the massive vaccination against COVID in Chile, we started with a research trial as to the impact and efficacy of the vaccines given to our citizens. And we were able to present in April of this year the effectiveness and efficacy of vaccines against COVID-19, led by Dr. Rafael Arauz. And this trial was published in one of the most important medical journals of the world, which is the New England Journal of Medicine. And this trial has had different updates periodically that have been presented to national and international experts, and also to the press and to the citizens in Chile. The importance of these trials conducted in Chile is to have local information as to the efficacy of the vaccines to support the decision-making. And thanks to the great number of people vaccinated and to the sources of information in our country and to our national registry of vaccination, we could compare the data as to the performance of vaccines that were given to our citizens in Chile. And to publish in prestigious international medical journals is very significant, because we can close our research and to corroborate that the vaccination strategy against COVID-19 developed by our country has been extremely effective. The research trial conducted in this last year has been very fruitful, achieving a research of the Ministry of Health and University of Chile that evidenced the behavior of antibodies of SARS-CoV-2 that was published in the Lancet Infectious Diseases. And this pandemic has forced us to put aside some healthcare for our citizens. And this topic has been an enormous matter of concern, and we also performed a trial which was published in Lancet Oncology, which estimates the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic in the diagnosis and survival for 5 cancers in Chile, and it does a simulation based in the analysis. In this very important trial, we propose strategies to do and overcome the gap in the cancer treatment in our patients, in our fellow citizens, and we had the participation of international and national experts, Dr. Bruno Nervi and Dr. De la Jara. And now we will present the trial of the use of inactivated vaccines that was conducted by the Ministry of Health in Chile. Dr. Arauz, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Good afternoon to the President and to the Undersecretary of Health. Good evening to all of you. I will summarize what we have been doing in order to give you some more details about the results that our President informed very clearly. On this study on the efficacy of the booster shot, we are following the people that are vaccinated in time to see whether the efficacy goes down. And we incorporated in that follow-up the follow-up of the people that receive their booster dose using the same methodology that you know so far. We have estimated the efficacy of the booster shot for COVID-19 and hospitalizations, and the next updates will include the deaths and ICU admissions. And I would like to refer to this with greater detail now. There is evidence that our decision as the Ministry of Health was based in 2 important points. We knew that the neutralizing antibodies that are part of the defense mechanisms produced by our organisms, the decrease in time and after the vaccination, after 3 or 4 months after the vaccination, the antibody levels go down, and this suggests that these people will have a greater risk to be infected. And we showed this some time ago, demonstrating that the effectiveness of the inactivated vaccines to prevent COVID, that is the disease with symptoms, decreased notably, and it especially decreased in the people that were vaccinated early against COVID, that were vaccinated between February and March. So it was important to start a booster dose, and it also suggests us that more than an effect of a variant of the virus, the problem was due to the immunity that decreased in time. And we saw international trials that showed that the vaccine combination with 2 doses is safe and effective. Give me 1 second. These are the effects of the pandemics when you work from home. Going back to this topic, we know that the trials that combined vaccine, they used a vaccine from Pfizer and then one from AstraZeneca, demonstrated that this was safe and effective. In summary, the trial that we did, you already know it. It includes a cohort of affiliates of the public health insurance system, FONASA. We have more than 12 million people that we could analyze, and this gives us a good idea of what happens in the country. We only included those over the 16 years of age and no previous history of SARS-CoV-2 infection, and those who already received a coronavac as a primary immunization schedule. The effectiveness was estimated to prevent COVID-19 prevention and hospitalization, and the effectiveness of Pfizer to prevent this results on the effectiveness of AstraZeneca and the effectiveness of Sinovac based on 2 doses separated by 1 month, which was the schedule used in Chile. The effectiveness was calculated 14 days after receiving the booster shot, and the results are compared with the people that had not been immunized. We did not compare this with the people having 2 doses. They are compared with the people that have not received boosted doses as a whole. That is the comparison that I'm mentioning. And the next one. And as usual, we adjusted the results according to different variables that can influence the risk of exposing to the virus, such as age, gender, place of residence, comorbidities and other diseases, nationality, and income level. The cohort included 11 million persons. We observed about 500,000 cases of COVID-19, and the non-vaccination rate of the vaccinated group was significantly different to the non-vaccinated group in relation to all of the different analyzed variables. This table summarizes the global findings of the trial to understand how the populations are formed. As you can see in the different columns, the first characteristic that we mention is the age. And here we see the number of persons that were in each one of the groups, that the ones that developed COVID, the ones that were non-vaccinated, and the ones that had received 1, 2, and 3 doses. And close to 2 million people formed the group of 3 doses, which is an important group. And when you analyze variable by variable, we see that the distribution of this in the different groups is significantly different. So it is important to make the necessary adjustments. Here we have the results. When we divided them in groups, we have 1,500,000 people that received AstraZeneca, 371,000 that received the Pfizer-BioNTech, and 140,000 that received Sinovac. And the results of efficacy are the following. When we compare the effect that 2 doses had measured at the same time was 56 for Sinovac, 56%. This protective effect increased to 80% when we compared the 3rd dose versus the non-vaccinated. This goes up from 56 to 90% in the case of Pfizer, and from 56% to 93% in the case of AstraZeneca. We cannot compare the vaccines among themselves because the vaccinated populations are significantly different. Great part of the people that received AstraZeneca was about 65 years of age. The ones that received Pfizer was younger, around 58 years of age, and the mean for those receiving Sinovac was close to 70 years. So we cannot tell whether one is better than the other one, but all the 3 groups vaccinated increased their effectiveness, and in the case of Sinovac, this increased more with the 3rd dose than with the 2 doses. As to hospitalization, protection is also important. We have less numbers here. The events are smaller, so there is certain uncertainty here, and it is important to see what will happen in the future. But the trend is positive, and Sinovac goes from 84% protection with 2 doses to 88% with 3 doses. Pfizer from 84 to 87, and and AstraZeneca from 84 to 96%. The AstraZeneca and Sinovac were used in high-risk population, elderly population with comorbidities, and this is a result which has to be highlighted. Pfizer also did very well, but this was mainly used in people below the age of 55.
So we can say that the 3 vaccines used as a booster were able to increase the efficacy against the symptomatic infection by SARS-CoV-2 and hospitalizations significantly, and also in numerical terms was very important. I hope that these results will stimulate everyone to go to get the booster shot with the vaccine they are entitled to. These results should provide the necessary confidence for people to actively be vaccinated with whichever vaccine is provided to them. And that way they can once again have as normal a life as possible and not to be like myself in quarantine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rafael Arauz. Excellent presentation and so clear. I will now give the floor to the Undersecretary of Public Health, Dr. Paula Daza. Good afternoon. The figures of the study that have been presented by Dr. Rafael Arauz reveal that the application of the booster dose with any of the 3 vaccines utilized is highly effective in the prevention of cases and hospitalizations by COVID-19. This information allows us to conclude that the decision to provide this additional booster shot to the regimen was adequate and efficient, since it has allowed us to extend in time the antibodies and to lengthen the protection to the most vulnerable population to get sick with COVID and prevent severe symptoms, which are the elderly and the chronic patients. It is important to remember that the National Immunizations Program of the Ministry of Health determined 2 months ago to use AstraZeneca as a booster dose for those older than 55 years of age who had completed their vaccination vaccine with CoronaVac. The trial shows that its effectiveness was increased to 96% to prevent hospitalizations, to 93% to prevent contagion, which is very positive. It is also tremendously important to see the result of vaccination with Pfizer, which shows an effectiveness of 90% to prevent contagion and 87% to prevent hospitalizations, which we saw with the Sinovac vaccine that showed an efficacy of 80 to 88% respectively. This is the first trial in the world to report results in the use of booster doses with different vaccines in persons who already have concluded the vaccination process to COVID with inactivated viruses. To have this type of trial and data allow us to adopt better decisions in public health. And likewise, we can guarantee that regardless of the vaccine utilized to reinforce immunity, the results will be successful. To date, more than 3.5 million persons have been vaccinated with a booster dose, and we will continue to advance in this process. We will give an additional step ahead in the campaign of COVID vaccination. Tuesday, October 12th, we will start phase 2 of the strategy of vaccination of booster doses. Starting that day, we will start the booster vaccination for all the persons vaccinated with doses of Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and CanSino laboratories. Persons who participated in clinical trials in the country with vaccines of AstraZeneca, Janssen, and CanSino, and persons who have done the homologation of vaccines received abroad. This phase, just as the first phase, will take place according to a schedule that considers the age and the date when the vaccination regimen was completed. During the first week, we will prioritize the persons 55 years and older with a complete regimen, regardless of the type of vaccine received. The vaccination schedule of the persons under age 55 will be published on a weekly basis. On this opportunity, we will use Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and will be applied with a minimum interval of 4 months between the last dose of the regimen of 2 doses or the vaccination vaccine and the booster vaccine. We hope that these results will allow us to make people who have not got the booster dose feel more at ease. We make an appeal to all the persons to review the results of the study. They will be available at the webpage of the Ministry of Health and will be published in international scientific journals. And you have to trust this vaccination process that aims to protect the population, and finally, to go to the vaccination centers on the dates indicated in the vaccination schedule. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Paula Daza. Thank you very much, Dr. Rafael Arauz. And I would especially like to thank our President, Sebastián Piñera, for being with us on this important launch. It is a fundamental news so that people get their booster vaccination and that we may continue to protect our population. Thank you very much.
Wear a mask, clean your hands, keep a distance, ventilate, and let us continue taking care for COVID.
Transmitió el gobierno de Chile.
This
Agradecemos a los
was
canales de televisión y
transmitted by the government
radioemisoras que
of Chile.
integraron
We
esta
would
red
like to
voluntaria.
thank the channels that are TV and radio that form part of this voluntary network. Hello, good evening to all of you who are connected to this session for questions and answers. First of all, I would like to welcome you all and to thank Mr. President and the Minister of Health and the Undersecretary of Health who invited me to present about COVID today. I will try to answer as best as possible the questions that we have. As a disclosure, I would like to say that there are many things that every time we present about this, they ask us about what is coming ahead. And we are moving the knowledge further forward every time. But what we can know is what has happened, and what comes in the future is a matter of research, and there are many questions whose answers will be hypotheses and more than specific and concrete answers. And the presentation of today, more than analyzing the drop of effectiveness in time, we wanted to analyze the effect of the booster dose or the third vaccine dose, and this is what we needed to evaluate to reaffirm what we were doing or to make some corrections if these were necessary. And before starting to answer the questions, we know that the three vaccines that we use that are different platforms, one is an inactivated vaccine, the other one with a virus vector, and the other one with messenger RNA, are very effective in recovering the effectiveness that had been lost with time, and these lead us to have levels of immunity that we had not seen with the primary schemes of vaccination. I will answer some questions. The first one says, good evening. For how long could the immunity last after the application of the booster dose of the vaccine? The simple answer is that we don't know, but we can speculate that it could last longer than the primary schedule. And there are things that lead us to think this, because the levels of antibodies that are generated after a booster dose, this has been seen abroad as well as in the trial that we are conducting in Chile, whose data we are analyzing. And we see that the levels that are reached with the booster doses with any one of the vaccines that we use are very high, and they are higher than what is achieved with the primary vaccination scheme. Even if the same kinetic was observed throughout the time, when you reach a higher peak, this leads us to think that we can separate the fourth dose or the revaccination next year. So I will hope that it would last well for 6 months, especially for the most severe consequences. And a fourth booster dose could allow us to separate the vaccines more up until we reach a scheme of a once-a-year vaccination scheme, as we do with the influenza case. And this is a possibility. And the second question says, the children vaccinated with Sinovac, Coronavac in the initial scheme, have you considered a booster dose in the future? Probably yes. We have no reasons to think that children will behave different than adults, and probably the children will respond better, and it will be less urgent with them to start this booster dose. But this will be analyzed for the whole population, and we have to consider the different vulnerability of the groups. And Gabriela Straham asks Dr. Daza, she said that the third dose of booster will be with Pfizer, the third dose could be with Sinovac, or the fourth dose could be with Sinovac, but we would be speaking of an annual vaccination scheme, and you could have the option year after year to evaluate which is the vaccine that you want to use for different reasons. The good news is that the three vaccines that we have tested tested as a booster are quite solid, and as we have more immunized people, either due to infections or due to the vaccines, we will have a population that eventually will need vaccines that are not so potent as the ones that we used at the beginning, and probably an inactivated vaccine will be very potent in terms of decreasing hospitalization and death. And I think that CoronaVac is a very attractive alternative. It competes head-to-head or very closely with other vaccines that started with better data, and it has some advantages, that it is cheaper, for instance, and it has a safety profile which is quite good, and it is very well tolerated.
I will proceed. Question 4, Gabriel Russo. The children will receive 2 doses, or it will be just as the adults with an additional booster? Well, I answered that question partly, but I believe it is important that you must not stick to the idea that we will have a 3rd booster shot for the children, but they will go into a vaccination regime that's probably on a yearly basis eventually, maybe the first, second semester next year. That needs to be defined. But I believe that we will have to continue with similar vaccination schemes as is done with other diseases, such as influenza, as I said. Question 5, Cecilia Yáñez from ¿Qué pasa? La tercera. Did you measure antibodies? What type of antibodies did you measure? And the answer is no, we don't measure antibodies in population studies. We could not do the trial if we wanted to study at 11 and some million persons. But the trial, there is a trial that's ongoing with the recruitment done. The persons are being studied, and we're just doing the mid-long-term follow-up. In that study, we have 4 groups. A group that received placebo, not a vaccine, and 3 groups that received each one of the vaccines that we used as a 3rd dose. And we measured the baseline antibodies after 15 and 30 days, and then we continue with longer-term antibodies. What antibodies do we measure? What we call the neutralizing antibodies. It's done in a university in the lab, and University of Chile lab, and the idea is to see what's the difference of the antibodies in each person between the baseline assessment and after being vaccinated with a booster. And so we make these measurements of neutralizing antibodies in time. What I can tell you informally, because we are analyzing the data, these are very complex data that need lots of lab work, and then compilation and studying of the data. But the trend is very clear that the increase of neutralizing antibodies are quite powerful for all the vaccines that we're analyzing. So that somehow supports what we are observing at an epidemiological level. So the answer is no, we don't measure antibodies, but we're measuring it in another trial that it's like a subset of the bigger trial. That's question number 5. Then, question number 6, Pablo Cruz. When will it be necessary to have a 2nd booster shot, or will it be necessary to start a new vaccination regimen? Along the same lines, I believe that we should be talking about a vaccination program every 6 or 12 months. We are learning. We're learning along the way. Now we have a way to look at the data that will allow us to analyze what's the right moment when the effectiveness starts to wane and what would be needed. I hope that this booster was the only one that was needed to do rapidly, and that next year we can start having annual vaccinations. I hope so, but that's yet to be seen. Then, question 7 from Manuel Hernández El Mercurio. We consulted when the data to the ICU and the death there. Why didn't you report them? The data are always there, but in the case of deaths associated or that happen in patients or persons who have received the Sinovac 3rd dose and we have 0, we can say that that's the level of protection that has generated. Or maybe it's because we have done very short follow-up of the persons, but we started vaccinating with the third dose August 11. We make the effectiveness analysis 14 days after putting the third dose. So these are preliminary results. And on the other hand, remember that people who get sick from COVID takes quite a while before they get to the ICU and an even longer time before they die. So the data are very good. I could show you what we have and what we have analyzed of deaths and ICU, but we considered that we don't have the sufficient number of events in order to responsibly report on that. The data look very good, the same line with the ICU and hospitalizations, but from the confidence intervals are giant, sometimes go from 0 to infinite, so we cannot draw any valid conclusion. That's the reason why they were not included. There is no other intention. But then we have periods and hospitalizations, so we know there's a relationship with them. Having outcomes in terms of hospitalization itself is a proxy of what will happen, because people are hospitalized, then they aggravate, and then they die. So probably there aren't that many changes, but that's the response.
Question number 8 from the El Mercurio. The second question is that the effectiveness of Pfizer with the booster dose is lower than with 2 doses is because the first 2 doses were with the Sinovac vaccine. We cannot compare among vaccines, and we cannot compare heterologous vaccination schemes that the third dose was different to the initial schemes as to the yield of the first evaluations of the other vaccines, and we cannot do this for different reasons. And there is a basic reason that probably the risk of infection is less than the infection risk that we had in March, and this could be a confounding variable and could lead us to think that a vaccine could be better than the other one. So it is important to look at the trend and to see when we see that jump or leap, and to correlate it with what we are seeing every day. Pfizer elevates the COVID protection from 56% to close to 96% in COVID and 80-something% in the case of hospitalizations. Is a tremendous leap. And the confidence interval for Pfizer, the indicator is around 87% of preventing admission to hospitals, but the confidence intervals in the higher limit are higher than that. So as we increase the people that receive the Pfizer vaccine and we have more events, we will have shorter confidence intervals, and our indicator can go up or down. Logically, we may think that the indicator will go up, so that is why it is important to continue researching. So when we publish this data, the analysis will be finished, and this takes time. We cannot do the analysis in a very short time. And question number 9, which is very good, which were the most common adverse events? The study that we leadered and the role that is played by Alejandro Jara is very important, and he is in charge of the mathematical analysis, and he has developed the way in which we look at the data, and this has been a contribution not only for the country but also for the world. So I would like to leave this clear from the start. And our role is to show the effectiveness or efficacy. So we are not the group that is studying the adverse events, but there is a group at the National Health Institute, the ISP, is doing this, and they develop periodic reports. For the time, we don't have red flags as to severe adverse effects in the vaccinated population with the different doses. There is a greater trend of adverse events such as fever or adverse events that can happen right after the vaccine, and we are developing a greater effort in capturing these events, and we were becoming more strict now with the third dose, which is new. For the time being, safety signals are positive, and as we have any doubts, we have to report it and we have to study. This has not been the case in this smaller clinical trial. We have not seen red flags for safety signals that concern us.
Then, a bit of a detail here. The trials that have switched doses in other countries, they have the same results, that they're safe, but there is a greater reaction. The side effect is not severe, but they get some more discomfort when you get the third dose. So maybe in time, knowing whether that is more associated to one vaccine or the other may lead us to choose. You can say, for example, this vaccine is just as good as the other one, but it's better tolerated. Well, that may help the policymakers in the future to choose on the vaccine, not only the effectiveness, but also the side effect profile and the tolerability, not only the safety, but how well people feel. Ideally would be to get to the vaccination center, get my vaccine, and continue to work. Question 10, Juan Rodrigo Morales from Las Últimas Noticias. What should be the booster vaccine for those who are vaccinated with Pfizer, CanSino, and AstraZeneca? Once again, there is no information, clear-cut information for that. Everything targets the fact that those vaccinated with Target and AstraZeneca may be vaccinated with any platform afterwards. There's concrete published data, fundamentally from the UK group, studying heterologies, regimens, and they will continue to publish what happens with the third doses and schemes with switches, and the use of Pfizer or AstraZeneca in any combination before or after is safe and effective. So those two groups can get vaccination with any of those two alternatives. And eventually, if we were to need, for any reason, to vaccinate those persons with Sinovac, there's no reason to think that they will respond worse than the persons who are vaccinated with Sinovac, having been vaccinated with Sinovac. And if we do so, we would have to measure it. As I said, large part of the program is thought out to vaccinate with AstraZeneca the elderly population and Pfizer the younger population, and the alternatives are supported with CoronaVac, and probably will continue to follow the same line for the people who have received other doses and need a shot. CanSino, we know less, so probably you'll get what's appropriate for your age, yet we will follow them very closely to make sure that those persons also respond that they should to vaccination. Now, the data with CanSino have not shown, we have not shown them, but they're few, but they look very well. The people who have vaccinated with CanSino have developed very well. 11, Victoria Silva. Doctor, what happens with those who have a Pfizer vaccination scheme in March? Is there any antibody level as of today? When will it be necessary to get a new shot? Well, no, not until we're not measuring antibodies for Pfizer. Yet if we look at what happened in Israel, we know that there is a reduction in time of the neutralizing antibodies. In Israel, that was associated to a tremendous outbreak they had recently, which fundamentally had circulation of Delta in vaccinated and non-vaccinated persons, and that was reinforced with a third dose. So as we advance in the rollout of the vaccination of the persons vaccinated with CoronaVac, we will start to include persons who are vaccinated initially with Pfizer. Many people vaccinated early on, healthcare professionals, we might need to start vaccinating them soon, and that will be seen in the coming weeks, and probably there will be a recommendation soon. But it's arbitrary decisions. There's nothing concrete, but probably they will need a booster dose. Question 12. Reina asked, you say that your trial is the only one in the world. What the difference from Israel's analysis from the booster dose? That's the title of the study done. It's rather relevant, irrelevant if you're first, second, or third in history, at least from my perspective. What is relevant is the first one that's done on inactivated vaccines. Israel has a small sample with little follow-up. What they show us is that using a booster dose, Pfizer, in persons who are vaccinated with Pfizer is a good idea. And what we do is that we say we're going to use a different population, very different. A Chilean population, it's not the same population that was vaccinated in Israel. It's a represented population of the country. 80% of the Chilean population is in the public health care insurance that does not discriminate per age or socioeconomic level. So we have a very representative sample of the country. So they're unique data in that sense. On the other hand, there are no reports on real-life study using inactivated vaccines, far less that they use 3 vaccines as a booster. So it's a unique study in that sense, and it gives results that are totally complementary to the results from Israel, because there's a large amount of countries in the world, particularly low and middle income countries, who have used inactivated vaccines, not just coronavirus, but other inactivated vaccines that have been used massively in primary regimens. And for them, that information can be generalized better in the country than the information that comes from countries who have only used messenger RNA or viral vector as AstraZeneca. So along those lines, it is unique. Once again, unique or not unique? No, the point here is that it provides answers to a question that so far did not have an answer, and it's a critical question for many countries, not only for WHO. Probably they will take this information to update the recommendations as to what to do with the booster doses.
The booster doses, I already answered this. We have to wait for the reports of the ISP, which is the way in which we can get to know the adverse events that have been analyzed and have been systematized and have been compared. There are no red flags as to serious adverse events, and in our smaller trial, we have some data that are not statistically significant yet, but they tell us that it is likely that the people that receive a third dose will have a lower tolerance than the people that receive a second dose. If there are differences among different vaccines, we're not able to answer that. Mariano Reyes, how is the evolution of the effectiveness of the population that receive a first dose of AstraZeneca and then the second with Pfizer? That is an excellent question. We have concluded the analysis of Pfizer. You have realized about that population when we gave the results of Pfizer, and their evolution is spectacularly good. With AstraZeneca and Pfizer, the great majority of the people are not hospitalized, and we have less people that die. With what we will give the booster, AstraZeneca or Pfizer, according to the age group, and there is any contraindication, we can give them a booster with Sinovac, which is also a very good alternative. Cecilia Yañez from ¿Qué pasa? In this trial, the effectiveness in order to prevent COVID is 90%. It means that out of 100 people that could have developed the disease, we will only have 10 people that will develop the disease when they were vaccinated. And yes, perfect, that is the case. These are the 15 questions that we have received. What can I highlight that we can think that probably the inactivated vaccines more than a booster dose should be given as a first time as schemes? If you think as hepatitis B, it is 3 doses. The initial, then at the first month and 6 months, and it gives protection for 3 years or more, but it requires 3 doses. This is an observation that I have as to inactivated vaccines, and we can say that they start competing with vaccines or with messenger RNA or AstraZeneca type vaccines. And these are my own comments. And if we have no further questions, I would like to thank you very much for your presence and your disposal to communicate these results. It is fundamental for the people to get to know about these trials, and they are very timely done and they are very rigorous, and this should lead our population to trust our vaccination program even more, and that we can start leaving behind this very difficult situation that we have all lived through. Thank you very much and good evening.
No dije lo de las redes sociales. Chao, sí. No, chao. Está perfecto.